Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kayla Stukins. Today I'm going to be doing my 5th book review on my channel, and it is actually a dual review. So I'm going to be doing 2 books by Andy Weir, both The Martian and Artemis. So these books are both sci-fi novels, so if you really like science and you really love like drama within your sci-fi novels, these are definitely books for you. So firstly, I'm going to be talking about The Martian. So The Martian is basically a survival sci-fi story. So basically this guy named Mark Watney, he is one of the first people to ever be on the moon. Him and his crew are on a Mars expedition, exploration mission, and all of a sudden it's their 6th day on Mars and this freak storm happens and all of his crew books it and runs away to flee Mars, but they think he's dead, so they leave him there. You know, they have a strict policy not to bring the body back because it's too heavy. So they leave him there, but it turns out he survived it. So he is now on Mars all alone with little to no chance of survival, and he has to figure out some way to prolong his death long enough for someone to come and get him, and the next people aren't supposed to come for like years. So he has to figure out how to survive for years on a lonely planet with like nothing, you know? So first off, I want to talk about the style of this book. So the narrative style is pretty cool. Mark frequently has these little logs that he calls just log entry. And so it's different days. And the soul is basically a Martian day, which is 37, I think, 36 minutes longer than a normal day. So he's telling about his time on Mars through these log entries. So it's never in, I guess, the present tense. It's always he is recounting his day after the fact through these logs. A few times he'll have audio logs where it's happening as he's going about the events, but most of the time it's these logs, which is a really cool way to tell us exactly what day it is, because we know he has to survive for like a couple years. So it's a great way to keep track of the days and see it as it counts down. Next, I want to talk about Mark Watney as a character. I think Watney is one of the most likable and funny characters in any book that I've ever read. It's just something about him, the jokes he makes, that just kind of draws you to him. It describes in the book how his natural coping mechanism is humor and laughter. So when he's dealing with something like this, or when he's trying to calm down his crewmates back before they left him, he will crack a joke or, you know, just laugh at something as a way to cope, which as someone whose coping mechanism is laughter, I thought that was really cool to see. Another thing I think is cool about his character is that he is not necessarily one of the best people to have a great chance at surviving on Mars. He's literally a botanist / mechanical engineer. I think it's mechanical, but he's a botanist engineer stuck on Mars. You know, he knows how to make plants, but I think making him a botanist and making him also an engineer is a great character to have as well. It kind of gives him an upper hand, because what are the things you need to survive on Mars, or anywhere really? You need oxygen, you need water, and you need food. What can a botanist do? Make food. What can an engineer do? Figure out some sort of fancy equipment to get you oxygen and get you water. So like, he is a very, very smart and intuitive character. He is going through all these complex chemical and just science reactions, and a lot of them, he's like, I've never done this before, but this kind of makes sense, so let's try it out. He also uses everything around him to try and survive. He uses like bags, he uses like his own urine, you know, he uses anything around him that he can that is gonna work. He even makes like a water purifier or something, some sort of equipment with another crewmate's like spacesuit. Like, he is smart and uses his resources very, very well, because he's on a foreign planet. Like, what is he gonna do? If he dies up there, like if he needs help, there's no one there to help him. He's alone on an entire planet. I just think his character was written very, very well. Weir did a really good job at making Watney very, very likable. Watney is so funny. This is literally one of the only books, if maybe the only book, I've ever openly laughed at multiple times. It was just, the jokes were a little cheesy sometimes, but that's kind of what makes it funny, is because like he is alone on this planet and you know he's probably gonna die. There's a big chance he might die, so he's just like cracking jokes. And there's a lot of times where he's like, you know, my chances of survival are really going up right now. You know, maybe I should stop being so weird in these vlogs because maybe somebody's actually gonna see them and I'm gonna be alive to see that. It's very funny. And my next point I'm gonna talk about is the science of it all. So this is obviously a very science-driven sci-fi book. There's a lot of science in here. If you are a science nerd, this is a great book for you. But if you don't necessarily like science, I still think you're gonna enjoy this book a lot. The science is for the most part understandable, even if you have no science background whatsoever. Like the only knowledge of science I really have is like just my regular elementary and high school education, but I still could understand it because he made it understandable in a way where you maybe didn't understand the science, but you understood the stakes of what was going on. Also, I loved the reason why he was explaining all of this, because for a book filled with so much science, you can almost err on the side of info dumping, whereas you basically just tell, and it gets old listening to it over and over again. You're like, there's too much information right now. But when you have a case like this book where he's trapped on Mars and he's making these audio logs and just regular entry logs to his crewmates, to NASA, to the people of Earth, it makes sense for him to explain these processes, because like the ordinary people of Earth who don't know science are not going to understand. You know, I love that they had a justification for why he was telling you all this science. It wasn't just telling you for the point of telling you so you understood the book, which is true, but there was also a reason why he was telling you all of this. He describes these things in detail because he knows that one day someone's going to find these records, whether or not he lives or dies. Someone's going to find them and have to go through them and maybe release it to the public because it's such a big case. Like someone got stuck on Mars alive, alone. More than, like, that never happens. So he makes sense. Which they also have scenes like this back at NASA where they're trying to figure out how to get Watney back to the ground. And they do use a lot of scientific like jargon and really scientific terms there, but they also, we wrote a character in, her name is Annie, she's a reporter who asks a bunch of questions because how would she know, you know? Like she's not a NASA nerd, she doesn't know these scientific things. So I think putting a character in like her who doesn't know what's going on so she can ask questions and thus give the audience answers is very, very smart thing to do. It wasn't just a bunch of really smart NASA people in a room just talking about what to do. There was constantly someone who needed it explained to them so that it was explained to the audience as well. You know, if that character wasn't written into the books, there would be realistically no reason for them to explain all the terms that the NASA people were explaining. Andy Weir also did a very good job at still keeping the suspense in the book, even if you didn't necessarily understand the science of it. The majority of the book still kept you on your toes because you were wondering what's going to happen next. You know, as soon as something good happens, something bad happens. You know, the rover crashes, his food gets blown up, you know, this, that, and the other. The seal breaks. You know, it still kept you on your toes even if the science was kind of lost on you. And there were some parts of the science that I didn't understand, but I still, again, understood the stakes of what was going on and understand that that was serious, what just happened. I also really enjoyed how, you know, this was very much pitched as like a solo man on Mars trying to escape, but they also dealt with the politics of it all. It was still a survival novel, but they talked about how NASA and his crewmates and just the general population of the world was responding to such an unforeseen crisis like this. You know, how they were working with other space stations and making deals, particularly the Chinese space station, who gave up a really pricey piece of equipment in order to save Watney, you know, an astronaut that's not even theirs. And while they obviously value human life, they still wanted something out of it. You know, they're one of their astronauts on the moon. You know, they still wanted something in return. It also shows, you know, how they deal with the increasing pressure of the public and the public eye and how they view NASA after a situation like this goes wrong. There's a lot of scenes where we see Annie or another reporter giving a speech about what's happening to Watney and, you know, even them having to withhold certain pieces of information from the public in order to, you know, make sure they can deal with it without adding more drama to it. And then one of my favorites, I guess my top favorite way they showed this was with his crew. You know, his crew left him behind on accident, and the higher-ups at NASA decided not to tell them that Watney was still alive. They didn't want them to have to deal with that while they were coming back from Mars. You know, they thought it was too much, so they didn't tell him. And even Watney figured they would tell him, and he was rightly upset when they didn't. You know, and then we see the crew decide to spend like 500 more days in space just to go back and get Watney. You know, because that's their crew. They don't leave anybody behind if they can help it. And you know, we get to meet the crew's families through like these video call letter things, which I thought was really cool. We get to see, you know, while they're so supportive of their loved ones being astronauts and going out there to save people and they save their crewmate, they're still a little mad because it's like, you know, you're gonna be gone for 500 more days, which is understandable. You know, I like that they had both sides of that. And then for the end, I'm gonna go just a little bit into it. If you've read the book, he was saved, right? They got him and he came back. And I just loved how the whole book is him having to rely on himself. Like some scenes he doesn't have communication with NASA. He has no one to help him. He has to kind of figure out how to survive on his own this entire book. And then when it comes down to it at the very, very end of the book where he needs to be saved, it's his crew that has to do it. He has to rely on his crew to pull him out of the spaceship and get him back onto theirs. You know what I mean? The very last part, he's been surviving on his own this entire time. He has to rely on someone else, which I thought was very cool. I've never really read a sci-fi book before this book. I've read this book like 3 or 4 times. It is very, very good. I've read it in one sitting once. It's a very, very good novel, and even though I know at the end he survives, it still gets me entertained every single time I read it. I give this book a 5 out of 5. It is one of my favorite novels ever, if not my favorite. It is very, very good, and I recommend anyone to read this book. Even if you've read it before, read it again. You know what I mean? Alright, so now I'm going to go on to Artemis, also by Andy Weir. So this book is very different from The Martian. If you like The Martian, I think you'll enjoy this book, but if you're expecting as good a quality as The Martian, you're just not going to get it. Something I forgot to mention in The Martian, but I wanted to show you with this as well, is the maps they put at the beginning of the book. So in Artemis, it has this map of like the civilization that she's living on. It just to keep you, so they're talking about these landmarks, you can actually see them. There's also that in The Martian as well, which I thought was very cool. So you could go back and, you know where they're talking about and follow along his journey to safety. Anyway, so the story of Artemis is a story of this 26-year-old girl named Jazz. She lives in the first ever colony on the moon called Artemis. And she is a porter, which means she basically delivers stuff to people's doors. She's like Amazon, but on the moon. But she also doubles as a smuggler, which means she takes in stolen contraband from Earth and gets it to people who buy it on the moon. And she's approached by one of her regular clients, and he's basically like, hey, I need you to do this job for me. It's illegal, but I need you to destroy like these oxygen harvesters or something like that so that I can basically take over one of the businesses on the moon and get a lot of money and give you a lot of money. So she's doing this job because she's poor and she needs more money, but then along the way she kind of gets herself into this war that's kind of bigger than herself. You know, the issue between the mafia. So it's kind of, yeah, she gets into trouble with the mafia. So that's fun. Yeah, that's basically the plot. She was like, oh, let me just go do my criminal thing, and then all of a sudden it's a war between people of Artemis and the mafia. So yep, let's go! So out of the gate, I think the world building is pretty good. It really describes the difference between each of the 5 bubbles that are in Artemis, which if you looked at these are the 5 little bubbles of like where people can live or work or yada 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 yada. It shows the divide between the upper and lower classes of Artemis. You know, Jazz is so poor, she lives in a very, very poor part of town and has basically lived there her whole life since she was 6 when she moved to Artemis. She makes the majority of her living smuggling contraband into the city to the really rich people in town, which in Artemis, it's really no different than on Earth. If you're really rich, you can basically get away with anything. Like, the higher-ups in this city basically know that this whole smuggling thing is going on, but they don't really care because it's bringing in them revenue, you know what I mean? And there's also tourists from Earth that come in. These rich people come in to Earth to see this lunar colony, you know, this high-tech colony on the moon. Basically, if you're not rich and you're just living there, then you are super poor and you're just trying to make a living because, you know, they need a working class. There's even a line in there that's basically like, if you have to ask how much something is, then you can't afford it. It is very expensive because it's on the moon. I just do wish there was a little more world building in Artemis for the city itself. You know, in The Martian, you don't have to go too much into the world building of Mars because it's just quite literally Mars. There was nothing too fantastical about it. We've all heard of Mars. Whether if you don't know the landmarks, you know what Mars is. And in The Martian, the layout and the structure and the gravity of Mars is described in detail how it works, including real-life names we can recognize like Pathfinder or Sojourner. It's real-life things that actually existed. Whereas in Artemis, the story takes place in this fictional colony on the moon that needs to be fully developed and explained to the reader because we have no idea what this colony looks like or what anything similar to that would look like. Whereas Mars, we can have a semi-good idea. It's red and bare, you know? It's not like on Earth where you can have a book take place on Earth in some small town area where everyone kind of knows what that's like. You know, we've all seen a movie about a small town, or we've all lived in a small town. We can identify those certain places. We're on this colony in the moon, we need to have it explained completely. And I just don't think it was explained enough for my taste in the book. So now let's talk about Jazz, our main character. So Jazz is described as this really tough, doesn't need anybody, doesn't care about anybody type of person. She doesn't trust many people, you know, because of what kind of things happen between her friend Dale and then her father. I mean, her best friend is Kevin, and he doesn't even live on the moon. You know, he lives on Earth and they're like pen pals. But this inability to trust people helps her stay alive. She is very cautious around people and always has a backup plan in case something goes wrong. She's a really good judge of character. She can tell when someone's being shady, especially when she had that final confrontation with the leader of the colony. She kind of instantly knew something was up. You know, at the end, she's basically worked alone her entire life, but in order to save her hometown, she has to trust people and trust Dale again, trust her father again, trust people other than herself to get the job done because she can't do it alone. Which I thought was a great moment of character development for her, finally having to trust somebody. I thought it was well done. I would, however, have loved to see more of Jazz's life as a smuggler and as a porter. We only really got to see it with Trond, who was the one who made the proposition to her for this job. But I would have just loved to see more of her day-to-day life doing this job. You know, because that would have been a great way to show the world a little more if she just had a couple chapters of her just doing her normal job, which there were some in there, but I just wanted a little more just to kind of get the context of this place. Like, as if you would have said she was just a deliverer for Amazon, like on the Earth, we all know what that looks like, but I just wanted to see how different it was for the moon. And I wish we would have dived just a little more into the socioeconomic and like class divide and struggles between the people on the moon, and to see how, again, how it's different than on the Earth. Again, it was in there, but I just wanted a little more, you know what I'm saying? She also has a pen pal relationship, like I said, with this man named Kevin, this boy named Kevin, her friend from Earth, which shows scenes from her growing up, scenes from how her and her father stopped talking. It just shows her growing up on the moon, which again gives a little reason for her to be explaining this complex science stuff to Kevin, because again, he doesn't know what the moon is like, so she explains it to him through the letters. There were a couple issues I had with the writing of Jazz. I thought in some areas of her character she wasn't written very well. I mean, you have a person of color, she's a person of color, and you write in that she has to refer to someone as Hitler's wet dream, which as a person of color, maybe don't do that. That just felt like very weird to me. It just kind of didn't sit right with me. I didn't like that, but okay. Also, it felt like her character was obviously, you know, written by a white male, you know, which leads to a lot of awkward moments between her and like other male characters, and scenes where Jazz just doesn't feel like a real human being at some cases. There was a moment in the book where she tells the audience that she's 26, and I genuinely didn't believe it because she seemed like a teenager. Like, she seemed a lot younger than that. It's just, she didn't really feel like she was written her age. But I liked her overall. It was just there were a certain few issues I had with her. And overall, the science in this book I think was a bit of a letdown from The Martian. It just didn't intrigue me as much as The Martian did. A lot of the science felt like info dumping, and it didn't really make as much sense to me as it did in The Martian. I think they were both written pretty well. However, I feel like there was more of a reason for The Martian to go into deep detail about these scientific processes, more so than in Artemis. Because, you know, The Martian had these logs that Watney was describing, and the whole book was basically those logs, whereas Artemis only had these letters to Kevin every other chapter, and like only in the beginning of the book. There's a point where they stop happening. And the confrontation at the end around page like 195 with the leader of this colony just didn't feel very authentic. It felt very cheesy. Like, the dialogue felt very much like, haha, I've been a bad guy all along. Haha, tee-hee, guess what? I'm the bad guy. And it's also a very overused trope for the leader of the civilization, or like the civilization in the woods where they're gonna go escape to, actually being a bad guy. It just felt very cliche, and you kind of sensed it was coming. Like, if you're watching a movie, like a YA movie, or like just a movie in general, where the leader of the city or the leader of the saviors in the forest is played by a well-known or renowned actor or actress, you almost always know they're going to be bad, and I think it's overused in a lot of books. And, you know, the scene where she's kind of trying to rouse up the rest of her team to, you know, go up against these bad guys, again, just felt very cheesy. The dialogue just felt, let me say it again, say it with me, a little cheesy. I think he's much better at writing just strict science. But hey, how can I complain? I can't write books, so it was enjoyable. Also, the whole plot point with the mafia just kind of didn't make much sense to me. Like, I understood why they had to go up against these bad guys, but it just felt like it kind of came out of nowhere. And the ending with basically just them agreeing to have a standoff, where like, I won't do anything to you if you don't do anything to me. And the leader still stays in office even though she tried to kill Jazz. The bad guys for this company, who are part of the mafia, still get to stay even though they try to kill Jazz. And it's just like, we started where we ended. You know, we ended where we started, with Jazz poor again, and still smuggling, and still being a porter. And it's just like, what was the point of the whole book? Why did I read this book? Nothing was solved. Like, it was, sure, like, it was, the company was sold to Tron's daughter, but like, what? I was following Jazz's storyline, and I was supposed to be enjoying her and connecting to her, and then her story didn't even really go anywhere. She just learned to trust people more, which I guess is a very good plot development. Even still, when she was like hugging her father at the end, she was like, but don't tell anybody I hugged him, because that would make me look weak. And it's like, what was the character development? You know what I mean? It just felt like it lacked a little bit for me. Now for a little comparison. I know I've been comparing them a little bit here and there, but let's be honest, nothing was ever going to compare to this book. You know what I mean? This is one of the best books I've ever read, and the Artemis was not ever going to even come close. I feel like if this book was released on its own and not connected to Andy Weir's name and to The Martian, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, just because I didn't have any expectations going into it. Like, if it would have been some unknown random writer that I didn't recognize the name, it would have been a lot more enjoyable. So I had to, a lot of the time in the book, disconnect myself from Andy Weir's name and just read it as a solo book, which greatly benefited my experience. I think the plot of The Martian was a lot more enjoyable. The Martian was a story of survival and ingenuity with a really wise and smart character whose natural coping mechanism was laughter, which made it very enjoyable to read. Artemis was kind of convoluted, it was kind of confusing, it was a little boring at some parts. It had a female character who felt like it was obviously written by a white man despite her being a person of color. But again, I don't think any character is going to be better than Watney. He's, again, like I said, he's one of the most likable and funny characters I've ever read about. the jokes in Artemis just don't hit as well as in The Martian. There's some jokes in Artemis that just bordered on cringy that I just didn't really hit right. Like, I didn't laugh at all in Artemis, where I laughed a ton in The Martian, even after the third, fourth read. It was still funny to me. You know, Artemis also kind of got caught up in a lot of unfulfilled plot points about the mafia, which wasn't totally explained how they dealt with the moon and stuff. The science in The Martian is also a lot more believable and interesting, like I mentioned before. However, there is something in both books that I think was a little lacking, which is the character development for some of the smaller characters. Like in The Martian, less character development for his crewmates and the people of NASA and his family and all that. And for Artemis, there's less character development for the people she surrounds herself with, which in The Martian, having less character development makes a little more sense because it's a lone mission. He's on his own, so you don't necessarily have to go more into the character. You focus so much of the character development into Watney, into that one character, and I think it balanced well with not really knowing more so about his people. You still figured out a lot about their characters, but there was just not as much, which made more sense in The Martian. Whereas in Artemis, you know, there were these people that were actively a part of the storyline and were surrounded by her. So I just felt like there should be a little bit more character development for them, as opposed to just really smaller plot points. You know, you could make them developed a little bit more, in my opinion. They're still developed well. Just, again, I want some more. So, I gave Artemis a 3 out of 5. I still loved it. It was a very good book, but just compared to The Martian, you know, it's not going to get 5 out of 5 or 4 out of 5. And then just on its own, I feel like it's a 3.5 out of 5, but on Goodreads I put it as a 3 out of 5 because you can't have half stars. So 3 out of 5 and 5 out of 5. I really love these books. If you're a science nerd, I definitely recommend reading these books. If you're going to pick just one because you don't want to read 2 books, I understand. Read this one. Read this one. If you're more into the science aspect of it and you really want to know just more about science and about Mars, definitely do this one. If you're looking for more of just a mystery, how they gonna solve it, thriller, yeah, that kind of novel, this one. Got a book for both people, you know? So, do what you want. Read it, don't read it, don't care. If you're watching this, you probably read it, but that's okay. Okay, bye. Thanks for watching today. I'll see you in my next video. Next week, I am doing the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, I believe, by Stuart Turton. I've read a couple pages of it, really enjoying it so far, so I hope I have a good review next week. So, bye everyone, love you!